Testing. Can the audience online hear us? Linda, can
Yes.
you turn off your audio?
Take it off. Take your audio down or off.
It's off.
I mean,
Okay. Testing. Is that better? Can you guys hear us? Brant, Luann, can you hear us?
I can hear you. It's not real clear, but it's clear enough to hear.
All right. How about that? Is that better?
It is.
Thank you, sir. And, sorry, recorder on? Yes.
so Craig, are you ready? Yes. All right, I've got the recorder on. It is 5:08 p.m. Today is Thursday, December 1st, 2022. We're at the Bluff Community Center. I'm going to do roll call first. Linda Sosa.
Luann Hook.
Brant Murray.
Ann Lepinen.
Erin Nelson, serving as town manager.
Jim Sayers is not logged in yet. The first thing we're going to do is take care of the approval of Bluff Town Council regular meeting minutes and the strategic planning minutes from the 14th of November and the 15th of November 2022. Council, have you all read and received and read those minutes? Any changes, corrections, amendments?
Motion approved presented, Mayor.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Lou, is that an aye?
Yep.
Thank you. Anyone opposed? 4 ayes. Minutes are approved. Then Linda? There were 2. Yeah. Make a motion to open.
Well, there were 2 minutes.
They approved both.
Oh, both.
That's okay.
Okay. I make a motion that we close the regular meeting and open the public hearing.
I'll second that, Mayor.
All in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Then we are now in the public hearing. The purpose of this public hearing is to allow the applicant and interested parties to make public comment on the applicant Judy Lyman's petition to disconnect 640 acres of land from the incorporated boundaries of the town of Bluff. And those, the legal description is contained in the staff memo that was made available to the public and to Mr. Baird. It is on our public notice, on our website. It's on the public notice website, and it has been posted in town. We're going to listen carefully to the public comments. The town council and the manager will not be accepting any questions. The purpose of today's public hearing is for us to understand what the town's feelings are for or against the petition to disconnect the 640 acres. With that in mind, just remind everyone that the rules of conduct apply that we've been using for 4 years. That means everybody be respectful to each other, let everyone finish their complete thought before we interrupt and start into a different topic, and allow for differences of opinion. I think that most of us have been used to this, so that shouldn't be a problem. You can take your mask off if you wish to be able to speak. We would prefer people keep their masks on because of the high transmission rate in this area. Each person will have up to 5 minutes for public comment. Please state your name and your address. We're going to start the public comment with the folks that are here in person, move to those who are online, and then give a general catch-up. Mr. Baird is present here in the audience. Mr. Baird represents Judy Lyman on her petition, and he will have an opportunity to state his client's position, take any questions if he wishes, present any information that he has. There will be no decision or vote this evening. We have 45 days in which to consider and discuss all of the evidence, all of the information, and the public comment. It's extremely important that we have a clear record of this proceeding, which means please don't talk over each other. Remind me if I talk over you. I believe that is all that I have to say, with the exception of we could get the list. Would you grant the list?
Do you want me to do the presentation first?
Yes, if you just would hand me the list then. And then I'm going to turn this over to Erin Nelson, the town manager, so that she can present the staff report.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Nelson. I'm the town manager for the town of Bluff. This will serve as a very brief presentation to summarize the staff report that was published on November 28th, 2022. As Ann mentioned, the report is available on our town website at www.townofbluff.org. It was also sent to the town council members as well as the attorneys and Mr. Acton. This slide summarizes the petition information, naming the petitioner is Judy F. Lyman, and the petition request states, Judy F. Lyman owns the full section of real property described as T40S, R22E, S16, pursuant to section 102501 in Utah Code. Judy Lyman hereby requests that the town of Bluff disconnect the disconnection property from its boundaries. This property is 640 acres, which is 1 square mile of town. Up on the screen, you can see the map, our official zoning map. You can see that the Lyman property is in the upper right corner. This property is currently zoned agricultural 2. The second map presented this evening shows the bordering land to the Lyman property. The Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, also known as SITLA, and the Bureau of Land Management, also known as BLM, lands border the Lyman property. The adjacent land is zoned as Agricultural 1 and is currently undeveloped. This chart provides an overview of the land ownership in Bluff. You can see that based on these numbers, the Lyman parcel accounts for 640 acres of the 23,696 total acres in Bluff. This equates to 2.7 of the town's total land and 16.2 of all private land within Bluff's boundaries. In the full report, you can find information regarding the process of a disconnect and Utah Code information about this. The services that the town currently provides the parcel in question, analysis of the creation of an island or peninsula, other factors that the town should consider in their decision-making process. The recommendation from town staff states that the town must vote on the issue within 45 days of the public hearing. Appendices include the letter from Mr. Baird, maps, and information regarding SITLA policies. This concludes my summary of the staff report. I offer the full staff report as published on November 28th, 2022 into the record.
The staff report is received into the record. At this time, I would ask Mr. Baird if he has anything that he would like to offer, or if he would want to step to the podium, please.
Madam Mayor, I'll be happy to go first or last, however you want.
You can go both first and last. if you'd
Okay,
like,
well,
Mr. Mayor.
I don't intend to talk all that much. First, I'd like to thank the mayor and the council and the citizens for their interest. The mayor has been as courteous as she could possibly be and as professional in handling this, and I greatly appreciate it. Second, I want to thank Ms. Nelson for correcting my error in the legal description. I have no idea how I made it, just proving yet again that I'm human and imperfect. Third, I want to make it clear that my clients bear no ill will to the town. They don't want to hurt the town. They just don't want to be in the town. They don't believe they should be in the town. They've never wanted to be in the town. They really didn't know that they were in the town when it was formed. I want to talk just a little bit about the substance. First, there's one slight error in Ms. Nelson's staff report. This is a two-part process. The restriction of municipal boundaries is a two-part. The first is the council gets to make its decision. And there's no burden of proof on that. That is a purely political decision. The council can do whatever it wants to. If it sees fit to disconnect or restrict in the proper language, then it can restrict by adopting an ordinance. If the council doesn't see fit to do it, then my client has the next choice. The ball comes back into our court, and that is we can file a suit in court in which there's a hearing and discovery and a very costly mess of litigation where I make more money than I want to and the town spends more money than it should because it's got better things to do with its money, I hope. The last time I was involved in one of these, other than the one with Bluff 3 or 4 years ago, it cost about $250,000 for the city to defend itself. We really don't want to inflict that kind of pain on the city. On the other hand, we'll have to unless we are let out voluntarily, which is, again, the city council's decision. No burden of proof. The council can do what it wants to do under section 502.5, paren 4, close paren. So that's the small error in the analysis by Ms. Nelson. Let me just briefly go down the statutory basis for the court. And the reason I put the statutory basis for the court in is to let the town know that we're serious, and we think that if the town denies the voluntary petition, then the voluntary disconnection, then we think we'll prevail in court. Again, we don't want to have to do that. So let me go through the elements of the statute, and they're all specified in the staff report, and some of them were referenced in my letter, but I want to, in light of the staff report's analysis, I want to make a few points clear. The first test, if we get to court, is whether the disconnection is viable. There's no definition of viable, but I would submit to you that it's fairly obvious that 640 acres of tumbleweed in the middle of nowhere is viable on its own. It was viable before the town was incorporated. It will be viable in the sense that it just sits there. It doesn't really do anything. I literally just drove close to the property. I drove to section 15 on the way here. I got right next to the property. There's just nothing there. The second question is, does justice, and it's a badly written statute, does justice and equity require that the territory be disconnected from the municipality? The number one test of justice and equity on disconnection, according to the Utah Supreme Court in multiple decisions, is the land vacant? Does the land have any current uses, any current support from the city? Is it tied into the water mains, the sewer mains? Is it tied into the road network? Absolutely none of those facts are true here. This is pure vacant land in the middle of nowhere, or at least on the edge of nowhere. It's not even in the middle of nowhere. It's 3 miles away from the middle of nowhere. I'll go through a little bit more of that in response to Ms. Nelson's staff report on the same issue. But the key factor, the Supreme Court has said, is basically close to controlling is the land vacant? There's no doubt that the land's vacant. When I just was there, I got a little bit, almost got late to this hearing because there were some cows, but there's no human activity within a 3-mile radius of this property. There's just nothing there. The next question is, will the disconnection leave the municipality with an area within its boundaries? That means its remaining boundaries, for which the cost, requirement, or other burdens of providing municipal services would materially increase over the previous years. It is literally impossible for anyone to stand on that property and say that if it's no longer a part of the town, that it will somehow increase the costs of the town for providing services for you all and for everybody who lives in town. It's simply impossible. The final question is, second phrase, make it economically or practically unfeasible for the municipality to continue to function as a municipality? Again, it's impossible. Your staff report correctly shows that the totality of the taxes on the 640 acres is $124. Most of that goes to the county. The next largest share would go to the school district. I don't know, I haven't done the calculations, but my guess is that the town gets about $30 or less from the property taxes of this piece of property. There's no way that losing $30 will make this whole town fall apart. It simply can't happen. The final test, if we go to court, is if it will leave or create one or more islands or peninsulas of unincorporated territory. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail in response to the staff report. But note for the moment that that is not a requirement in the voluntary disconnection. If the town wants to disconnect this property voluntarily, then there's no prohibition on it based off of the island or peninsula status. So that's not relevant to the decision tonight. The final question is, the county in which the area proposed for disconnection is located is capable in a cost-effective manner and without materially increasing the county cost of providing municipal services, of providing the area the services the municipality will no longer provide. Well, that obviously is true because the county is providing almost all of the services anyway, with the possible exception of the volunteer fire department. But the volunteer fire department is not really providing any services to 640 acres of absolutely empty sagebrush or EMS services. The only services are cows. There's no one there. There might be in the future, but there's no one there now. There's no plans for anything to be there now. There's no possible way that the county couldn't provide the services, since the county has always provided the services and will continue to provide most of the services. Rocky Mountain Power doesn't count as a municipal service, by the way. The only thing that would count is sewer and water, and I'll go back to address those during the staff report. The final set of tests in the statute, and again, they're just horribly written. And I told the Supreme Court this in the Bluffdale case, that they're horribly written, and basically the court agreed with me on some of those. The test is you consider all of the relevant factors, including the effect of the proposed disconnection on the municipality or community as a whole. This property, and I drove it, as I said, it's 6 minutes off of 191, 3.2 miles off of 191. It's 4.4 miles to the sign that says Bluff on 191. I would suggest to you that the town of Bluff knows where its real boundaries are, or pretty close to where its real boundaries are, because you put the sign there. The sign is 4 miles away from the entrance to this property. The town doesn't even consider it worthy enough to be in the town to put the sign on the side of the road where the town would be. It's 8 minutes from the sign to this property. Literally 8 minutes and 4.4 miles. As a lawyer, one of the things I always tell my client is don't ask the judge to do something where they're just going to go, "Are you kidding me?" And if any judge goes out and stands on that property and drives, as I did, to the Bluff sign or to here, there's no possible way a judge could find that there would be any effect on the municipality or community as a whole. The same with adjoining properties. Adjoining property owners, in this case, are Sitla and the BLM. Now, I know the town has zoned those properties, but the zoning is utterly and totally ineffectual as a matter of law. Sitla cannot be zoned by a town. The federal government cannot be zoned by a town. You can throw all the pretty pictures that you want at it, but it's utterly and totally a waste of time. It's a waste of ink, it's a waste of breath. I've represented local governments, I've represented developers, I've represented Sitla. Sitla is in the business of making money. Their task, their literally constitutionally enabled or required task as a trust is to maximize their money. They're not going to sell property in the future for no value. There's no guess that they're going to do that. There's no hope that they're going to sell it in the reasonable near future. It's just going to sit there, as it always does. Sitla has hundreds of thousands of acres across the state of Utah, some of which are very valuable, stunningly beautiful, next to developed facilities. I'm not going to say that the town of Bluff isn't beautiful. Many of the parts of your town are gorgeous. That bluff where this property is 640 acres of sagebrush. There's not even any real geological features. There's not even real geological views from there. It's just private property in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on, existing or projected streets or public ways. There are no existing or projected streets or public ways on this property as far as I know. The street that was graded nearby is not on this section. It's on the neighboring section to the east, judging by the map that's there in my drive just a few minutes ago. I guess I could be wrong, but that map does not show it on this property. I've never seen a projected street. There's no water mains, there's no water services, there's no sewer mains, there's no sewer services. I don't really know why there'd be any law enforcement on 640 vacant acres, but even if there is, it's done by the county sheriff anyway, not by the Bluff Department. Zoning, again, there's no impact on zoning because it's just sitting there doing nothing. And frankly, there are no other municipal services. So that's the basics under the law. I do want to go through the staff report very briefly on the similar issues. On the second page, Ms. Nelson talks about the road maintenance happening there was a Class C road nearby the property graded in September of -- To me, that proves that the town really doesn't care about this property because that means that hadn't happened for nearly 4 years since the town was incorporated and only happened after we filed the petition for disconnection. Second, the wildland for fire protection. First, insurance is meaningless because it doesn't pay for anything. And second, if we do get into a wildland fire, there's going to be a much bigger problem on all of the remaining problem than Bluff's volunteer fire department could handle in any way. It would be great if they're helping, but they would be a very small part of the forces fighting any fire that would rage if it raged out of control here. So that doesn't make any difference. The EMS, again, what's the EMS going to service on 640 vacant acres? I've already talked about culinary water. It really can't provide culinary water because the property would have to bring its own. It would have to provide its own water tanks, which it would have to do whether it develops in the county or anywhere else. The town will not do anything to provide water to this property. Won't and can't, as a matter of fact. It doesn't provide sewer service. Electricity, I've already mentioned. Telecoms, I've already mentioned. None of those are relevant because the town doesn't provide them. So let me talk just for a minute about Island and Peninsula. First, let me go back to Sitla. There's about a page of analysis as to why Sitla might, at some point in the future, cooperate in some way. And that's true. Sitla might, in the future, cooperate in some way with the town. But that's not the same thing as saying Sitla is or will do it now. It's not the same thing as saying a private developer might do it. Mere speculation that sometime in the future, Sitla might do something that it hasn't done for this property in, I don't know, 120 years that Sitla has owned it, doesn't get you very far when the Sitla hasn't done anything. As I say, they have all kinds of other places that they would rather do stuff and develop. A large part of the rest of this staff report is speculation. Disconnection of the Lyman property, I'm reading from page 4, could impair the developability of other lands on the Bluff bench. There's no explanation of why it would impair it. If there's a need for the services, the city could condemn across the property. There's no reason to believe that the property would need it, that you can't go around it. There's no plans for the roads, there's no plans for the sewer, there's no plans for the water. Merely speculating about something that might happen is a fantasy, not reality, and the courts won't enforce the fantasy. The only remaining significant issue, or potentially significant issue, could you bring up the map, the surrounding properties map? Thank you so much. The only question, if it gets to court, that I see has any potential validity is the island issue. Thank you so much. I would submit to you that the court, when I discussed the island peninsula issue in the Bluffdale case, the court was clear that the reason you don't want an island is because it makes it difficult sometimes difficult for a county to provide the municipal services, because they'd have to go through otherwise town property, town-controlled property to provide the services. That's not the case here, because all of this property is surrounded by BLM and Sitla property that the city has no, as I've said repeatedly, no control over. So in my opinion, the island and peninsula purpose of language is not met here, because disconnecting this property doesn't leave it as an island of unincorporated territory. It leaves it as the middle of otherwise ungovernable by the town territory, because the city, as I say, can't govern BLM or Sitla in literally any way whatsoever. So it fails to meet the purpose of the island and peninsula test. Even if somehow it is deemed to actually create an island or peninsula, I think there's a relatively easy legislative fix that I would perhaps try to do, which would say that it doesn't count as an island or peninsula if it's fully surrounded by Sitla or BLM. Because otherwise, what's the purpose of where the city drew that boundary? I can't understand what it would be unless it was deliberate and a deliberate attempt to try to say you can't disconnect because you'd create an island or a peninsula. It would have been just as easy to draw the line so that the BLM property and the Lyman property isn't in it. There's no functional purpose for having the Lyman property in the town other than in an attempt if the town to exercise jurisdiction and prevent development rather than facilitate development. So with all due respect, and I mean that not in the insulting way of with all due respect, there's no reason for the town to fight and waste your tax dollars on this property. I understand why the town fought the prior Lyman disconnection property, didn't like it, they didn't fight it, they chose to do the right thing. I understand why that property was much more sensitive, why it was much more visible, why it was much more central to the mission of the town. This property is no different than any of that other sagebrush on the top of the town. This town's called Bluff, it's not called Top of the Bluff. We all know where the town of Bluff is. It starts as you descend into the canyon and you exit that way. The top of the bluff serves absolutely no practical purpose. It is not worth it, in my humble opinion, for this town to spend any money fighting for it or any effort. And I hope that the town council does the right thing. I do not want to take any of your money. Not that I'm getting attorney's fees, but I don't want to cause you to spend any money. I just don't, and my clients don't either. My clients just want to be where they were 4 years ago in the county and having their vacant property. Thank you. If you have any questions, Mayor or the council, I'm happy to answer now, or I'll wait.
Does anyone on the council have a question at this point? I have a few questions, Mr. Baird, but I'll wait till the end.
Okay.
after I've heard public
Thank you, Mayor.
comment. All right, thank you. We're going to take public comment. As I said, we'll start with the folks that are here in person. We do have a sign-up sheet here, and we'll start with Josh Ewing. There's 5 minutes. If you'll go to the podium, the next would be Mary Gillum. If someone hasn't signed up and they want to, just let me know, and I'll get the sign-up sheet to you.
Josh Ewing, 405 Black Locust Avenue, across the street. It's good to see a lot of you. Been out of town for quite a while. As many of you know, we've been splitting time between here and Philadelphia, and then my family's ranch had a disaster and burned down in a wildfire. So I'm very familiar with the importance of wildland firefighting and serving on the fire department here. But I really had to be back here for tonight, and for a number of reasons. One is that I was one of the original committee members with a few other people in the audience here who served on the committee to incorporate Bluff. That brought forward the town boundary that we're talking about tonight and was part of that decision-making and bringing that forward for the vote of the town of Bluff. And I really believe that it's nights like tonight is the reason why we incorporated. And I want to tell you a little bit why. When we decided to make the town boundary a large town boundary, it was a very intentional decision. And the reason is we wanted to have some amount of influence, whether small or large, depending on how the town developed. That it developed in a responsible way that protected our livelihoods, protected our water, protected our town. And so we did intentionally draw that boundary, as Mr. Baird said, to include some private property parcels. Now, we weren't really paying attention to the disconnect lands when we did that. Otherwise, we would have drawn in the Combe parcel a little bit better and made sure that it was an island. We didn't understand that law that carefully. In fact, we didn't even look at that law. The intent was we wanted to protect our town. And tonight, I think we have a decision to help protect our town. Now, I will say I still have a bad taste in my mouth from what happened with the Combe Ridge parcel. I think some of it was due to the threats that were bandied to the town that we're going to, spend a boatload of money and we're going to have to pay a bunch of attorney fees. And at the time, that was really scary because it was like we had been incorporated for like a month. We didn't have an attorney, we certainly didn't have a town manager, and we were just trying to figure out what happened. We didn't even have like a penny to our name, and it was very scary to be sued. But I would say that things are very different. We're in a very different situation tonight. For one, we are an established town. We have an attorney. That attorney happens to bill us at least half of what Mr. Baird's rate is. So we have a very good attorney for a reasonable fee. We have a great town manager who did a great staff report. Thank you very much, Aaron. We're just in a very different place. We have money in the bank, we have taxes, and I will assert that I pay taxes to fight this sort of thing. So I hope that you also pay taxes to fight this sort of thing, and I'll tell you the reasons why I think that is the case. But I will say this, I think that Mr. Baird's clients should be the ones that are afraid of spending a whole boatload of money on wasting money fighting this thing. Because if it really is the case that they just want to have their land out there, and they just want to have their sagebrush out there, there's no reason to be paying Mr. Baird's exorbitant fees. The Salt Lake Tribune, he was quoted as saying he gets about $600 an hour to fight that. So my simple math, and I'm not a great mathematician, is that just being in this meeting tonight, his client could have paid for 20 years of Bluff's portion of the property taxes. And if you consider his drive down from Salt Lake City, we're probably talking like 100 years they could pay the property taxes on this just for what they're paying him to represent them here tonight, let alone fighting this in court. So what my question is why are we really here tonight? We know it's not about taxes. We know that it's not about them wanting to leave their land vacant. The real question is, what do they really want to do that they're not willing to come to our town council and ask for a variance, that they're not willing to come talk to our planning and zoning commission. They're not willing to ask for anything. What is it that they want to do? And because they're not willing to answer that question, and they just want to say that it's because they just want to be left alone, none of us have been bothering them as far as I can tell, we are left to our own devices to figure out what are the worst case scenarios. We know that Sitla wants to move its oil waste dump that is on the eastern side of Bluff somewhere. Could they be looking for a private property to put that oil waste dump? Are they thinking they might want to build a housing complex? I have no idea what they would want to do, but we can be only left to assume that it's something that would not be good for Bluff, something that might threaten our water supply, something that might threaten our viability of our town, something that might piggyback off of all the hard work we do to bring visitors into our town, and they just don't want to participate in that. So I don't know what the answer to that question is, but I can only assume that it's a bad thing. And so if they're so afraid to talk to us and ask us for permission to do something that they want, I would assert that it really is in our town's best interest to not roll over here. Let's not roll over a second time and set a bad precedent. Because if we do this time, then anyone in our town that happens to be private property and doesn't want to be part of our town, doesn't want to be subject to our zoning ordinances, doesn't want to come talk to the town when they want to do something, they just get out of here because they're willing to threaten that they're going to take us to court and they think that we won't stand up for it. So I would say I don't like paying taxes any more than any of the rest of you. I really don't want to have to take this to court, but I think that we should in this case. We do not want to be in a situation where we are setting a precedent that anyone in our town that has some private property that maybe is a little bit further outside of town, and quite frankly, where we put the town sign is completely irrelevant because we put the sign there before the town existed. The boundary of the town was approved by the state of Utah. It was certified by the state of Utah before you and me and most of the rest of you in this town voted for it. When we voted to incorporate, we were voting on that boundary. And almost all of us voted yes, and we did it because we thought that that was the proper boundary. And if we were to start changing that, every city in Utah almost has some BLM or some Sitla property in there. And basically what we'd be saying is like, any Sitla property that's in your town, that's not really part of your town. I know you thought it was part of your town, and if Sitla decided to sell it, you would have some jurisdiction, but no, that's not really the case. The reality is Sitla is right now trying to get rid of a whole bunch of property within our town boundary. Like they have a bill that will be introduced in front of Congress to get rid of property that's in our town boundary. So they are actively looking to dispose property in our town boundary right now. So that property around that, the Lyman property could easily be private, and it can happen all the time. Anyone can go nominate it as Sitla, just as they nominated the parcel out on the Comb Ridge, and it could be private property, just like your private property or my private property, that should be subject to our zoning laws. So I think that there are a lot of good reasons for us to really question why we're even here tonight. But I would say that we should not roll over. We should not allow this to move forward. I know we're a small town. We are a new town, but we really care about this place. We care about the water that we drink. We care about what surrounds our town. We care about the future of this town. And if we really do care about it, I think it's worth us spending some tax dollars. It's worth us going to court. He's got this novel theory that somehow this isn't an island just because it's surrounded by Sitla property, and I think that is a completely irrelevant to this discussion. So thanks for the time tonight. I really appreciate all the hard work of everybody that has gone into looking at this. There's going to be a lot more in the future if we go forward with fighting this, but I think it's worth it. And I had urged the town council to do that. Thank you.
Next person up is Mary Gillum. And I'm going to pass this around if there are other people who want to sign up. I will acknowledge I let Mr. Ewing go about 3 up to that point, which is 8 minutes. And try to keep your remarks to 5 if you can, but go ahead, Mary.
All right. I'm Mary Gillum, 401 South, 500 West, and Josh is a hard act to follow, and he made many of my points. But I would like to say that I was also very active on the committee that through the whole process of preparation for an incorporation of Bluff, and I was one of the people who was instrumental in creating the maps, most of the maps that are attached to the staff report. The location of the boundary of the town of Bluff was established with a great deal of thought, and the decision to include the Lyman parcel and the surrounding Sitla and BLM land was very deliberate. Because there is so little privately owned land in the area, we felt that it was important to include all the nearby privately owned land in the town, as well as Sitla land that could potentially be privatized, because there's basically no room for development, or very little room for development within the incorporated boundaries of Bluff, within the central town area. And so essentially the Lyman parcel and the Sitla parcels, if they should ever become privatized, represent the future of Bluff, whereas Mr. Baird is just simply looking at the present situation. So the Lyman parcel represents about 1/6 of the total private property within the current boundaries of Bluff. In addition, Mr. Baird said that Judy Lyman was unaware of the development of the town, but actually all people who owned real estate within the current town boundary were notified about the incorporation plans very early in the incorporation process. So if she disregarded that information, that's at her own loss. I also think it's very important to state that if this parcel is disconnected, that would become an island. The fact that the surrounding property is Sitla or BLM has no bearing on that issue. So in fact, I would say that if Mr. Baird takes this matter to court on behalf of his client, it would be to Mr. Baird and Ms. Lyman that the judge would be saying, "Are you kidding me?" I think I've covered all of my points. Josh covered most of them. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Next one up is Bill Crowder.
Good evening to everybody. As Ann said, my name is Bill Crowder. I live at 685 West Cottonwood, the Roundhouse. I've been listening to the legal presentation and the first presentation by Mr. Baird, and I've been a lawyer for a little over 50 years. I had a national practice, state and federal court, and let's just say that his interpretation of the Utah laws and case law is a little different than what the case law actually says. I mean, he kind of slid past the point of an island by saying, well, you know, it doesn't really matter, what have you. But the Utah Supreme Court has said that if it's going to create an island, it's absolutely prohibitive to disconnect a piece of property, which is like, you know, point, game, goal, whatever you want to say for litigation. But another point that was repeated over and over is that this land is empty and it's worthless, and that's a matter of perspective. I mean, those of us who are here love this area, and that's one of the things we love about it, is it's empty, the vastness, the emptiness of it, the sense of grandeur. And yes, you can see the bluffs from up there, by the way. You've got this wonderful view down across the Navajo Nation, looking down that way. But if it's so empty and it's so worthless, then why disconnect from the town? I mean, it's real quiet, nothing's happening. Yeah, there's a few cows up there, but what's the point? Well, the point is they want things to change. And as Josh said earlier, well, if that's the case, why not say what it is you want to change, run it by the town, and see if the town says, yeah, sure, that sounds like a good idea. The comment was made by Mr. Barrett about the, well, if you really believe the law says what it says about you can't create an island, then it's easy enough to go to the legislature. And that's an admission that the law says what the law says, that you can't go into court and enforce it. The best you can do is go up to the legislature, but then you go up to the legislature, they're not going to make the decision based on the town of Bluff. They're going to make the decision based on the state of Utah and all the towns in the town of Bluff. And believe me, it's not going to be just slip this thing right through. In fact, I would guess that it would be highly unlikely that that would happen. The final point I want to make is, what is the long-term effect of doing this? To my way of thinking, this is just the first chipping away at the town of Bluff. If this one gets pulled out, then any other piece of property here in town could be pulled out by the same reasoning. Do we want that? I don't. Am I willing to spend money to stop that? You bet. And that's my comments.
Thank you. The next person is Marcia Hadenfeld and then Mark Bond.
Hi, I'm Marcia Haydenfeld, 7 CPX plus 5J, Bluff, Utah, is my address. I have this all written out, and I had it timed to 3 minutes, and I was ready to go because you make your plan. But my plan sort of blew up listening to Mr. Baird. So thank you, Josh, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Bill, for saying most of the things that got my blood boiling. But let me take it from where I wrote, which is the planning and zoning perspective of this. I have served on planning and zoning commissions for way too long for how old I am, let's just say. And I don't like being told that I don't know anything about it, whether it's by my husband or a lawyer from somewhere else. An island is an island, that has been pointed out. But my take on planning and zoning is the future. And that to me is that planning and zoning are two parts. Zoning is the idea that we're talking about agricultural land. Planning is what could happen on that land. And the idea that someone has a private piece of land that they quietly want to take away just scares us to death. And it scares us because even places like Sitla, do you all remember that Sitla came to us and said, we're going to put a phone tower above kind of where Bluff Dwellings is now. We're going to put a phone tower. And the town actually talked them out of it. We said, could you please put it on Casa del Eco because there's already a nest of towers and we could leave it there and not have some new blight in our view shed. And it worked. I am not saying that Sitla's ready to do that again, but they own so much up there, and there is so much going on that we better keep control of it while we can. We don't control the end result. We know that because we've been doing this a long time, and we know that zoning it didn't make it so for Sitla. But at least they ask. And if the Lyman property is disconnected, they don't have to ask, and we don't get to suggest. So this underhanded, in my opinion, proposal of, I'm going to pull my land out of there. I know that eventually Sitla might do something and there might be development, but I get to do what I want when that happens, and you don't get to tell me. Abide by the rules, because the rules were made for all of us. They were made, you don't like them all, none of us do, but we like the idea that we control what's happening around us. I think I said what I wrote here. I think I've heard everything else being said that I believe in. And so I would end with my recommendation to town council, obviously not as P&Z, but just as Marcia, and that is fight this because the town is ready to act and enforce all of the things that made us become the town of Bluff. So have strength, have the power, and have the law behind you as you take this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Next is Mark Bond.
Thank you. My name is Mark Bond. I'm a resident here in Bluff since '81, do the math. I have served 2 tours on the original Service Area Board of Bluff, 4 years, no, 3.5 years on the Water Board, and 20 years on the Fire Department. So I have a little investment here. It's already been corrected by Josh and Bill, the incorrect statements. We had nothing to do with the putting those town signs up. The town did, so that they don't really mark the borders of town. I don't think you're suggesting that we take them down. As a member of the fire department, I have fought on rangeland fires. It doesn't look like there's much out there to burn, but I guarantee you, if you get wind going through there and flame, you're going to have trucks out there. And I'm not so sure that there's not a dirt road that doesn't go on through there. I can't remember if the one I'm thinking of is further to the west or if it does actually impact that property, but one of the problems is, in terms of this becoming an island and having absolutely no idea what potential development could happen out there, and I believe it's correct that the Lymans were approached when the town was figuring out the boundaries. I don't believe that any comment was received from them. But in terms of that becoming an island, and not having any idea what kind of development might come through there. So you really don't have any idea in the future what kind of roads may have to come in there from the county road that is just to the northeast of there. And my last thought is, what kind of precedent does this set throughout the state for removing pieces of private land from incorporated areas? So I appreciate what Josh and Bill's approach. They made their and Marcia's too, made their statements a whole lot better than I'm sure that I did. But anyway, there you go. Thank you.
speaking. So I'm going to turn this back over to Erin so she can ask the online participants who wants to do public speaking.
So what I'll do is if you're interested in making a comment virtually, please put your name in the comment box. I do see that Michael Havakin has his hand raised. And so we'll have Michael Havakin speak first.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to talk about that road out there, Horn Pasture Road. The month after the town incorporated, that road was graded, as all those roads out there on the north end of town are graded every year. The town pays the county to grade that road. The attorney talked about what's not on the land. My concern is what's below. I believe the aquifer, the town's source of water is up there on the bench. So is obligated to protect that source of water. And there is human activity on that lot because there's a corral there. And the reason that road gets graded is to serve the ranching industry that uses that as a winter pasture. But my main concern is the aquifer. So I beseech the town council to decline this request. Thank you.
Person who had their hand raised was Britt Hornsby, I believe.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you, everybody, that's spoken before me. You summed up a lot of what I wanted to say, so thank you very much, and thank everybody for coming out at 5 o'clock on a Thursday to deal with this issue. The first thing I want to address is that this is Bluff is the area in question is far from the middle of nowhere. It is clearly within the town of Bluff, what's designated as Bluff, and this is our home. It's not the middle of nowhere. It may seem that way to somebody that's not from around here, but plenty of us spend tons of time in that area, hunting, walking with our kids, walking with our dogs, getting out of the busy Bluff metropolis down here at the bottom. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And then I wanted to address some of the things. There's a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk about was already covered by others. I wanted to address some of the comments made by Mr. Barrett. First off is the SITLA and the BLM issue. We're aware that we can put ordinances around and they're not enforceable on BLM and SITLA land, but this isn't about BLM or SITLA land. This is about a piece of private property that is within the jurisdiction and is owned. Which also I want to mention that, anybody that read the letter from Mr. Barrett could see that it was just absolutely riddled with errors. Anybody that knows town knows that we contract out the sheriffs, that Bluff Fire would be the first to respond to a wildfire. And it would indeed get out of hand if we had to wait on BLM to show up from Monticello or something. It absolutely would be Bluff responding to those fires. But the whole letter was riddled with errors and filled with threats. And I think that's because most of what they have to stand on is threats, financial threats in particular. I agree with Bill that Mr. Barrett glossed over many obvious problems with their claims and that it won't stand in court. I also want to point out that 8 minutes is not very far for around here. So that might sound like it's a long time, but I've been in Salt Lake City and it's taken me longer to get a couple of blocks in my car, there much longer than 8 minutes. So I'm not sure that has any relevance to anything at all. Let's see. I also want to point out that we just got our roads here in town worked on. I mean, it's not a matter of where you are. Like sometimes it just takes a long time. Thank you, Michael Havakin, for all the work that you do, getting our roads taken care of. That's just a product of rural life. I would think that someone from Blanding would understand that, at least know about it. It's not a big deal. Sometimes you wait for your road to get graded. Not a big deal in the slightest. I'm very concerned about, I'm glad Bill brought it up. I'm very concerned about Mr. Barrett's cavalier attitude toward just approaching the legislature. That makes me worried about the legislature and his influence on it, that he could so cavalierly talk about just reaching out to him to change a law that doesn't suit his client. that's upsetting. And I'm wondering if he represents the legislature in any way or who he answers to on that. Yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say. Everybody else covered everything else. Thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
The next person I'd like to ask to speak is Carolyn Jackson. Carolyn, please feel free to unmute your microphone now. All right, we might need to come back to her. I see that Brant Murray has a hand raised.
There we are. I hear a lot of echo. Everyone who's spoken tonight is someone I know and respect, and I hope that the council will take into consideration how important our relationship is with each other and with our town, which we work very hard to incorporate. The first question that I had when I heard about this proposal was, where is the property owner? Who is she? Why is she not willing to come before the council and make her case? It seems very odd in a town with so few people that this person hired a lawyer before appealing to her neighbors. And I think that's really a question that should be probed, because we're not eager to go to court, of course, but we're not unwilling to stand up for our community. And there's a lot of land in Bluff and not a lot of people. And we count on one another to be honest and open about our motives. Even when we don't agree, we have an open and I think generally honorable solution to these things. But I would not ever vote, and I would hope the council would not, to make an agreement with someone who did not appear before her neighbors. Thank you.
I show that Brant Murray has his hand raised. Brant?
Hey, everybody. What a great group of citizens we have, and I'm happy to hear the comment. I do believe it's an island. I do believe that's necessary for the future of Bluff, for the growth of Bluff. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. People that have spoken before me have clearly made the case of why we need to keep this in Bluff, and that's how I feel.
I'd like to open it up to anyone else online. If you're interested in making a comment, please put your name in the chat, raise your hand, feel free to unmute yourself. And then if we don't have anyone else online, we'll move back to anyone in the room here. But we'll give it just a minute for folks online. Now is your time to be heard. I'm not seeing any.
So is there anyone else in person who wishes to make a public comment that hasn't already made one? Then if there isn't,
Get one more online.
okay, who do we have online?
Jackie Warren. Jackie, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you, Erin. We've all talked very well, I think spoke very well of the repercussions that come from not being able to control our environment. I speak from experience. Many years ago, and we all know there is a gravel pit on top of the bluffs, and dust was coming down into the valley, and people were getting respiratory infections, etc. And we were able to negotiate them using water to keep the dust down, etc. I know they spoke that this property is farther back, but looking at the map, if that piece of property were developed as it was proposed many years ago as a diesel truck stop for trucks to idle overnight. The toxic fumes from idling trucks, 10 to 15 trucks, would come right down Spring Canyon, right down Cottonwood Wash, right to our brand new elementary school. So our children would go to school with toxic fumes coming from on top of that bluff. We do live down in a valley, and we're all talking about land, but what about the air? The air comes right down. 4 miles is nothing for a breeze with toxic fumes to hit our elementary school. So thank you for talking about the water, the land, the roads, but remember the air we breathe. Thank you.
We typically don't take comments via chat, but I'm going to make an exception. I do have a message from Deborah Westfall. Deborah writes, "It's important to protect the Navajo sandstone aquifer." If there's anyone else online, now's your time to speak up. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to the folks here. We sincerely appreciate everyone joining from near and far today. I'm not seeing anything else. Thank you all.
Is there anyone else? Mr. Baird, may I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure, can I respond? Mayor, it seemed it was customary to allow a rebuttal to some.
Sure, would you like to do your?
I will, if that's okay.
That's just fine with me.
In law school, you learn a phrase called the parade of imaginary horribles, which is where people trot out things that don't have any basis in reality, but they're there to scare people. I would suggest that a potential truck stop 3 miles off of 191 on a tiny little itsy bitsy road is an imaginary horrible. I understand the concern about water, but any development has to meet state engineer requirements to protect the aquifer. It's an imaginary horrible. It certainly needs to be protected. No one is suggesting that it shouldn't be protected. In response to, and I'm sorry, I don't remember Josh's last name. Ewing? Sorry, because I usually prefer to say Mr. Ewing as opposed to Josh, and so it's more formal. I would submit that what some people don't understand is sometimes things are about principle, and rather than paranoid speculation about something horrible supposed to happen on this property sometime in the future. Some people actually pay money for principle. This town may pay money for principle to defend it, but I would suggest to you that to speculate that my clients are doing this anything for other than principle is they just don't want to be in the town. They don't get anything out of being in the town. And yes, they're paying me a lot of money. That's just the way it works. And they're paying me a lot of money because I win. That's just the way it works. Let's talk about a few other factual statements that Mr. Ewing made that simply aren't facts. The boundary wasn't approved by the state. It was recorded by the state. It's a pure ministerial action. As long as the legal description closes, it will be recorded by the lieutenant governor. It wasn't approved in some validating kind of way. It was simply recorded. Next, he said that Sittler had a bill pending in Congress to divest some land. Sittler does not need congressional approval. BLM might, Sittler doesn't. Sittler is a creature of the state of Utah and does not need congressional approval. In terms of islands, as I stated before, and I'm not wrong, there is nothing in the voluntary disconnection provision that prohibits a voluntary creation of an island on a disconnection. I was clear about that. I didn't gloss over it. I said that there's nothing in that statute that prohibits the creation of an island. I did specifically address the island in a court proceeding. I didn't gloss over it. I recognized the issue. I explained my rationale, and I explained a fallback position. which isn't surprising because people change legislation all the time. I actually lectured on that subject at the Bar Convention 5 years ago on changing a legal provision to, I've done it dozens of times. Doesn't always win. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The legislature can make their decision in their infinite wisdom. What I simply said was, I would go to the legislature if I needed to, not as a concession that I needed to, but if I needed to. And I will try to do it if we need to. So it's easy to say, fight this, and I really do feel sympathy for the council members. As we talked about 3.5 years ago, they have to make the hard decision. It's easy to sit in the peanut gallery and throw peanuts. It's very difficult to make a choice as a council member. And just a couple of other points. Some people seem to take offense that my client isn't here and that I'm here instead. You know, lawyers get paid a lot of times to speak for people. You may be offended, but that happens all of the time. It's not a surprise. And it may well be true that my client got published notice of this, but you don't know the personal circumstances of my client at the time that they got notice. You don't know why they may not have chosen to respond at that time. I'm not going to discuss it here, but there are lots of legitimate reasons why you don't always notice what you've seen as a published notice. We all throw our mail away whenever we get stuff. She might have just thrown it away. I don't know. I'm not going to go into it, and I'm not going to speculate. I do want to take one bit of personal umbrage. Someone said that this was underhanded. It's not underhanded to follow the law. The law provides a process for doing this. We followed the law. To suggest that following the law is underhanded is insulting. Mayor, do you have any questions, or members of the council?
I do. So, Mr. Beard, you've talked a lot about your client and maybe not the reasons that she might not have responded, you don't know. But what's the plan for that property? Is there a plan?
That's a fair question, Mayor, and to the best of my knowledge, after asking my client that, they have no plan at the moment. There is no plan for this property at the moment. None that I'm aware of, none that are lurking in the background that I'm aware of, none that my client have told me, and I've asked, and there's nothing. As I said at the start of this, sometimes it's just about principle.
Has your client indicated to you that she feels that we've treated her unjustly or unfairly in any of the ordinances we've passed or anything that would directly affect her?
I didn't, no, I don't think I said that, Mayor. I've not gotten that impression. But sometimes you just don't want to be, quote, controlled by a bunch of people who are controlling your private property and doing so in general for the obvious purpose of preventing all development.
Does anyone on the council have any questions for Mr. Beard? Linda? No. Brant, you've already made a statement. Do you have any questions?
I don't, Mayor. Thank you. I think everybody's position is clear.
And again, I want to thank you as a courtesy. The council has always been great, and Mayor, you've always been great, and Aaron, I haven't met you before today, but I appreciate your efforts.
So if there is nothing further at this point? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I thought we'd closed the public hearing, so we can.
Not quite. We haven't had the motion. Is Britt's hand raised, or is he just?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my hand was raised. Well, it just seems like we should have a chance to rebuttal against you since you got to get up and challenge what folks said. I don't think it's at all insulting to follow like the law, as you're saying. Like, as a matter of fact, I mean, we're trying to follow the law, town law, and you're trying to get out of being a part of that law to go to a law that suits you more. So I find that kind of insulting. But anyways, that's basically all I had. And I think other people should probably have a chance to respond to him, especially the ones that he specifically addressed.
We're going to be here forever if that happens.
You make $600 an hour, so you should be okay with it, I would think.
Go ahead, Linda.
I make a motion to close the public hearing and go back to the regular meeting.
Is Brant on the line?
I am. Second that.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Then there's one other piece on the public meeting part, which is the other. I have no others. Does anyone on the council have an other? Then is there a motion to adjourn? It is 6:23.
Motion to adjourn, Mayor.
I second it.
All in favor, say aye.
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 And I'd like to thank Mr. Baird. He's been very cooperative, very pleasant to deal with, and I appreciate it.